as they speak. Windows that gaze onto landscapes of boundless joy. Hills that sing as they frolic. Valleys that stretch on their quivering backs, greening themselves and humming to themselves in the solemn archways of the throbbing sun. God one, the universe one, in the live mathematics of this singular song. Assalamu alaikum.
The next speaker doesn't need much introduction here either. He's also been speaking here for a couple of years. Dr. Hakim Murad is a lecturer of Islamic Studies at Cambridge in England. He's also the editor of Imam Ghazali's series published by Islamic Text Society. And he's the director of the Anglo-Muslim Fellowship for Eastern Europe. Tonight's topic, or general theme, will be Islam in the West.
I'm going to do this by invoking a phrase that seems to be on every American lip these days, which is challenging stereotypes. Americans do occasionally talk about other things, in my experience, as an occasional visitor to these shores, but about 85% of American sentences seem to involve challenging stereotypes, as far as I can see. So on the principle of darihim ma dumta fi darihim, I shall try and do the same. I've chosen as my rather hopelessly predictable topic Islam and the West, and of course that can immediately be deconstructed because Islam and the West suggests an opposition. And as Muslims, we don't believe there is an opposition because, after all, وَلِلَّهِ الْمَشْرِقُ وَالْمَغْرِبِ, East and West both belong to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Islam is in the West, and the West is in the world of Islam. These two supposedly mutually exclusive and antagonistic principles are in fact engaging with the other far more substantially than sometimes we as Muslims, or sometimes the Westerners, whoever they may exactly be, like to acknowledge. But I chose that topic in order to try and, I suppose, build on what Sheikh Abdal has been saying about being happy and cheerful about our Islamic identity. Sometimes we can feel overwhelmed as little corks bobbing around in the stormy sea of Western modernity, and we're not quite sure which wave is going to hit us next, and we see some sinking never to re-emerge, and we can feel threatened and worried by this, and that's understandable. But it's not an Islamic attitude. Islam inhabits the West increasingly as a sign from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to the world of its universal nature and mission. One of the proofs, I would say, and I sometimes dangle this before incredulous students back in Cambridge, of the authenticity of Islam as a genuine revelation from God, is the fact that it works here. I can practice what is required of me as a Muslim here in Chicago or in dusty old Cambridge or just about anywhere on the planet. Had the religion that emerged in 7th century Arabia been a false religion with all of its do's and don'ts, and there are many, inevitably some of that, given the particularities of that world, that time and space, would simply not have been workable here and now. But it's our experience that, on a personal level, the religion does work here. It's one argument for Islam, the fact that it simply operates successfully wherever it historically has been. Now, this universalism of Islam is fundamental to our self-understanding and has to be particularly central to the way we present Islam here, because we are a minority, and precisely because Islam is often not seen as a universal religion. It is seen as an Eastern implant that 2 or 3 generations will vanish, like some of its predecessors. But it's written into the very stuff of the revelation. The Rasul alayhi salatu wasalam indicates this in a number of hadiths. He said, every prophet is sent unto his own people, but I'm sent to all mankind. Bu'aithtu lin-nasi kaffa. This mission is for the Ajam as well as for the Arab. And this is the meaning of his Ishmaelite identity. And it's a great sir, and one that we don't sufficiently reflect upon, that he is the only Ishmaelite prophet. Sayyidina Isa and the Hebrew prophets who preceded him were from the line of Sayyidina Ishaq, alayhi salam. Our prophet alone is from the line of Sayyidina Ismail ibn Ibrahim al-Khalil, alayhim salam. And this means something very tremendous. Why? Because Ishaq is all Hebrew, son of Sarah and of Sayyidina Ibrahim. Sayyidina Ismail alayhi salam is half Gentile. His mother, Hajar, is an Egyptian. And this is a sign that Islam is the branch of the Judeo-Christian family that is destined for all mankind. Christianity often presents itself as a universal religion. Frequently, historically, it has managed to be that. But that was not the self-understanding of its founder, because after all, the whole point of being the Messiah was that you were the culmination of the Jewish story. The Jews, in their scriptures, in their writings, never expected the Messiah to be for the Gentiles. But the error of Paul and those who came after him was to think that somehow the Messiah was always meant to be for the whole world, and that was never the case. That's a misunderstanding. Ours is the only truly universal religion. Proof of it is in the practice, and the proof of it is in these enormously important founding symbols, the Ishmaelite religion. I'll come back a little bit to Sayyidina Ismail later, inshallah. Now, looking at this universalism as the starting point for our understanding of our position here in the West and our responsibilities here, I think it's helpful to jolt ourselves out of the slough of despond into which many of us seem to have fallen by remembering that Islam is actually a great success story, not just in the past, but also in the present. Sometimes cradle Muslims seem to have lost sight of this because of the apparent regnant status of the Western powers. But somebody who is relatively new to Islam and who looks at the world fundamentally as a historian, I would say that that's a disastrous error. Islam is the great success story of modern times. Why is this? Well, let me take some very crude indications, first of all. Simple demography, the basest of the bottom lines. To the beginning of the 20th century, the number of Muslims in the world was estimated at about 12% of the total. Now it's around 20%. It's a very substantial increase. Within 30 years, it's expected, and usually these predictions are fairly accurate, to be between 28 and 30%, at which time, that is in the third decade of our millennium, Islam will be the most numerous religion in the world in terms of the number of its followers. That's an enormous boost to Islam historically, from 12% to 30% of the world's population in 130 years. It's an enormous victory, albeit one that was not exactly planned. Family planning is not always our strong point. So that's one very crude indication of why I think we need to be optimistic and have more smiles on our faces. The extent of Islam is also growing enormously. Here we are in darkest Chicago. 100 years ago, how many Muslims were there here? Maybe half a dozen, only dimly aware of their Islam.